Hi, my name is Lori Beggs, and I teach the Careers in Education program in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at the Delta Schoolcraft ISD Career Tech Center. I'm located in Delta County and in Escanaba, Michigan. So when I say I live up north, I mean in the UP or in the 906. I love it up here, and I love being part of this educational careers family, and I'm so excited to be part of this book read, and appreciate all of my colleagues that have put this together so that we could be together and share some ideas and some things while we're going through this pandemic and in our time of isolation. So here's the book, I Wish My Teacher Knew, and I'm here to read chapter 6. And it starts out with a card from a student that says, I wish my teacher knew that I've lived a hard life, and I try my hardest and best to remain positive every second of the day. Chapter 6, Value-Driven Classrooms, a school culture that develops character. If you don't work in education, you might not understand what a teacher's job really is. If you think our job is to teach students reading, writing, and math, you're wrong. Teachers teach students, not subjects. We are in the business of growing people by creating situations in which students collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. This requires that our schools and all teachers take an active role in developing the children in our classrooms, not only as scholars, but also as human beings with strength of character. Developing a moral code. Psychologists understand morality not in terms of its inherent presence or absence, but rather as something that develops as a child learns and grows. The initial leader in the field of moral development was psychologist and researcher Lawrence Kohlberg. His research, which built on the theories of fellow psychologist Jean Piaget, presented participants with a series of dilemmas and identified 3 different stages of moral development. While there has been criticism of Kohlberg's work, especially given that it focused on the experiences of Western males, his 3 stages are a useful tool in understanding how children develop moral reasoning skills. In Kohlberg's levels of moral development, children begin a pre-conventional stage where their moral reasoning is focused on obedience and avoidance of punishment. Then they shift to look at moral decisions based on the rules of society and how they will be perceived by others. This stage, focused on being good, is called the conventional stage. We have all had students in our classroom who built their identity around being the good kid. I once had a girl in my class who was visibly nervous at the thought of getting in trouble. I talked with her at staged reprimanding her in front of the whole class just so she could see that making a mistake and being corrected was nothing to fear. Ultimately, some children will reach a post-conventional stage where they examine societal rules to determine what justice means to them and begin to follow self-chosen ethical principles. It is important to note ethicist and psychologist Carol Gilligan's theory, which adopts the same 3 levels, but contends morality is care-based and that people follow ethics based on their care of others. Theories of moral development help us teachers understand that morality exists on a continuum. But I also see another key takeaway from analyzing how moral development fits into our classrooms. If we want to develop highly moral students, our goal should not be to create compliant, rule-following, perfect students. Our ideal should not be schools with silent hallways where students never interrupt. These schools might have obedient students who avoid punishment, but they are not necessarily the most morally developed. According to this theory, a student with advanced moral development will create their own code of ethics. It might align with the values of the school, but it might also be different. A student with advanced moral development might be someone who questions the authority of a school, especially when the school or its policies are inequitable. And given the reality of the achievement gap in American schools, it would be hard to make the argument that our nation's schools are equitable. I'm not saying that schools should do away with rules or expectations for behavior, but I do think a highly moral school culture might also value productive rebellion based on strong and solid principles. Here's an example of that. What My Teacher Doesn't Know. And it's written by Catherine Ocaranza Cortez. All throughout school, I was the kind of student teachers loved having in class. Always studious and attentive, I took the utmost care with my schoolwork and participated in clubs and academic contests that extended my learning as far as I could. But in my senior year of high school, my classmates and I pushed our learning far outside the classroom, so far that we shut down our school for 9 months. My hometown, Antofagasta, Chile, is a city trapped in a narrow line in between the desolate Atacama Desert and the Pacific Ocean. Our dusty city is filled with hardworking, honest people who are just as stoic as they are generous. It is also filled with a legacy of inequality left by decades of unjust practices in our educational system. In Chile, our schools are capable of providing students with a world-class education. Yet we also have extremely high rates of segregation across social classes. In 2011, the disparity could be ignored no longer. As one reporter put it, there was an overwhelming perception that Chile's education system is grossly unfair, that it gives rich students access to some of the best schooling in Latin America while dumping poor pupils into shabby, underfunded state schools. So when I saw university students marching and protesting against this inequality in the streets, I knew I could not stand by and watch other people fight for my right to an education. My fellow classmates and I began organizing and marching in the streets as well. Though our education was nearly complete, we stood with conviction and demanded that future generations receive a quality education regardless of how rich or how poor their parents might be. Then, after much debate, a group of classmates and I made the difficult decision to occupy the school. We knew that it meant lessons would be temporarily stopped for students. But in the end, we knew that by closing down the school, our cries for change would be heard. The occupation of our school was not a scene out of a spy movie. Student representatives even discussed our plans in advance with the director of the school. At night, some of my classmates went to the school and wove heavy chains around the doors and clasped them shut with padlocks. During the nights, about 30 students, including me, slept at the school. Each day, hundreds of students arrived on school grounds to attend meetings and help the cause. At times, university students came to teach us about the economic and political pressures that caused the inequality our schools had been experiencing. They taught us about a citizen's role in a democracy and made sure that we all understood the rights and responsibilities of this role. Other times, we found creative ways to make our voices heard. Some of my classmates choreographed and performed dances in the Central Plaza to show our unity. Other times, we discussed our dreams for our future and the future of our country. When the protests started, most of our teachers were critical. Some thought that we were wasting our time, that we had conflated ideas of the impact high school students could make. Others denounced us for halting the education of the younger students. We listened to their criticism and negotiated an arrangement to continue the occupation of the school while allowing space for younger students to attend their classes. This compromise earned us respect and support from most of our teachers. Some even marched with us. It was my history teacher who encouraged me the most. He urged me to face issues of inequality head on. He told me it would take courage to change the educational realities for future generations. a sentiment I will carry with me always. In the end, most of our demands were not met, but this does not mean we failed. We have not yet given up the fight. This whole experience taught me more than any of my school lessons could have. I took this opportunity to apply my academic skills to a worthy cause. I learned how to have meaningful dialogue, how to express my opinions, and how to listen critically to others. Most of all, I learned that a democracy requires action and sacrifice. I believe in the power of a voice. I believe in change, and I believe in people. That is why in just a few months, I will graduate from university and become a public school teacher. In this way, my fight for a better education for every child has just begun. So powerful. Impact of character education. The term character education can be a bit ambiguous since it is an umbrella term and because its meaning has changed over time. The U.S. Department of Education has defined it as an inclusive term encompassing all aspects of how schools, related social institutions, and parents can support the positive character development of children and adults. The definition continues. Character education teaches the habits of thought and deed that help people live and work together as families, friends, neighbors, communities, and organizations, and nations. Character.org, a privately funded nonprofit organization that works with schools, districts, and other organizations to develop character in students, adds that it addresses many tough issues in education while developing a positive school climate. For me, character education means an effort by the whole school community to positively develop a strength of character that will help students live in our society both today and tomorrow. Currently, there is no clear consensus on the impact for formal character education programs. I'm going to reread that. Currently, there is no clear consensus on the impact formal character education programs have on student academics or student behavior. The Institute of Education Sciences, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Division of Violence Prevention in the National Center for Injury Prevention collaborated to write a 656-page report evaluating the impact of 7 social and character development programs, the SACD, over the course of 3 years. The report did not yield evidence that the 7 SACD programs improved student outcomes. Another publication from Fresno State University reports, our research suggests that school goals and activities that are associated with good character education programs are also associated with academic achievement. Thus, our results argue for maintaining a rich curriculum with support for all aspects of student development and growth. And a 2013 article in The Atlantic stated, schools that teach character education report higher academic performance, improved attendance, reduced violence, fewer disciplinary issues, reduction in substance abuse, and less vandalism. Character education should not be seen as a magical intervention that solves learning and behavior problems, nor should we justify teaching our students to be positive members of society based on the ability to improve test scores. As a teacher, I strive to model positive character traits and cultivate a supportive culture because it is the right thing to do. My students will grow up to become members of my community, and I want to live in society with people who are caring, hardworking, and resilient. As a state and federal character education advocate, Linda McKay says, I think it's absolutely one of the most critical pieces of it for education, particularly in high-risk schools. If we don't focus on creating a climate for learning and a classroom culture where students and faculty feel cared for and respected, we won't get to the academics. And here's another card from a student who said, I wish my teacher knew that sometimes my feelings and emotions are already crushed when I walk into class, and he or she makes it worse by being hostile. Ooh. Character, an academic priority. There's much discussion on how teaching character can predict future success in a student or lead to a student meeting a long-term goal like graduation from high school. This is all true, but we must also look at more immediate benefits of teaching character education. As a third grade teacher, it is not possible to teach my students academic content standards if I do not also develop an understanding of character strength, ethics, and value. Pure and simple, in order to read my students, I need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of personal character. After all, the purpose of literature is to reflect humanity back on ourselves, to teach us lessons about our society and ourselves. In Colorado, our schools have adopted the Common Core state standards, a move toward more rigorous instruction, which I wholeheartedly champion. We may think these standards are purely academic, but on a closer look, we see that knowledge that comes from character development runs throughout. Of the 9 English language arts standards for reading literature in third grade, I see direct connections to character education in 5. For example, my third grade students need to describe the traits, motivations, or feelings of characters. In order to achieve that goal, my students first need to have knowledge of and a vocabulary surrounding character traits. When I cultivate a shared understanding of courage, determination, and honesty in my classroom, I teach not just the dictionary definition of those particular words. I also help to develop the conceptual knowledge and an ability to describe a character in a story or a person in their lives. Another key standard for my third grade students is to determine the central message, lesson, or moral of a text. I help my students build that skill by intentionally discussing how people, both in real life and in books, overcome hardships and use strategies to solve problems. More rigorous standards have made developing empathy an academic requirement. My students need to understand that authors, like all people, have beliefs and attitudes. They need to recognize textual evidence that denotes an author's feelings and opinions. When students are able to empathize, that meets another standard to distinguish their own point of view from that of the narrator or those of the characters. I think of a guided reading lesson I recently taught. In order to understand the book, my students needed to read and decode the text. But they also needed to decipher that the main character's actions were driven by jealousy, and her motivation was to be accepted by her peers. Students discussed this and wrote an essay explaining how the author explored the themes of jealousy and friendship. They could not have done this if they were not able to empathize and analyze the integrity of the characters in the story. Character education and reading comprehension go hand in hand. The complex act of reading requires students to engage with characters in a book in the same way they interact with people in real life. At every level, students must be able to notice the character traits present or absent in the text. They must take note of thoughts and actions that imply a character's emotions in order to make inferences about the character's underlying motivations. These skills are developed when we intentionally develop a child's emotional intelligence alongside their academic abilities. Quite frankly, character education is an academic priority not just for success in the future, but for success every day in my classroom. And here's a little shared story from a 6th grade teacher called In My Classroom, from Luke Moreland, a 6th grade teacher. Our school can only be described as value-driven. Our 6 core values of respect, responsibility, integrity, courage, curiosity, and doing your best are embedded into everything we do as teachers and as students. We never waste an opportunity to teach character. It is in the books we select, the questions we ask, and even in the vocabulary we highlight. But this year I gained a whole new appreciation for how character education impacts our students. In the first few weeks of school, teaching my students brought on a new challenge. The students in my homeroom were more diverse than ever before. They were from widely differing economic and cultural backgrounds, had varying levels of academic preparedness, and in addition, there was a new level of neurodiversity I had not experienced before. Our school had just opened a new center-based program to serve students who were impacted by autism, and 3 of these students were assigned to my homeroom class. As a school, our goal was to fully include these new students into our community and support them in doing rigorous academic work. Achieving this goal was challenging. These 3 students had varied experiences with authentic inclusion in elementary school. They were adjusting to learning in general education classrooms like mine, and I was still developing my ability to support them in the unique ways they needed. Due to this, a variety of different social behaviors were displayed in my classroom. One student in particular, Aiden, coped with his new environment by rolling on the floor, running around the room, and making loud noises at inappropriate times. Honestly, I was worried. I wanted Aiden to get the support he needed, but I was also concerned that these behaviors would tear the classroom culture apart. To respond, I made a renewed effort to focus on teaching character strengths. We explicitly taught lessons on the meaning and necessity for equity and inclusion in our school. We read texts like Wonder by R.J. Palacio, a beautiful book with a strong message of tolerance and empathy. A major part of my approach was identifying students who could become leaders and model empathy and support for students like Aiden. I saw tremendous potential in Jamie. From day one, Jamie had shown an exceptional ability to encourage his peers, once even raising his hand to declare, "Mr. Morin, I think before we start this competition, we should all decide to show respect and tell the other team they did a good job, no matter what." Each time Jamie displayed strong character like this, I made a special effort to use his actions as an example for the class. As the year continued, I saw notable improvements in my homeroom class's behavior. They were adjusting to the rigors of middle school and acting more cohesively, but it seemed that there was still a barrier holding students like Aiden back from participating fully in our community. One day, something amazing happened. Our class was ending the day with our usual routine. Students formed a circle of blue plastic chairs, and one by one, students gave each other shout-outs, where they acknowledged hard work for kindness they had observed for their classmates or from their classmates. Aiden, however, was on the floor in the back of the classroom, unwilling or unable to participate. Then Jamie made an announcement. "I would like to give Aiden a shout out." I seized this opportunity to engage Aiden and called to him, "Aiden, there's a shout out for you." I was a little surprised when Aiden stood up, walked over to the group, and sat in a chair that had been waiting for him. Jamie told the whole class that he was proud of Aiden for doing his best on his math work. Aiden took this information in and then bluntly asked, "Does anyone else have a shout out for me?" I eyed my students, wondering what this group of 11 and 12-year-olds would do. After a short silence, hands shot up. A chorus of compliments followed. From that day on, Aiden's experience began to change at school. He increased the amount of time he was on task and was able to take more control over his disruptive behaviors. I was proud of my students. By including Aiden and encouraging him, they had taken ownership over the character traits I desperately wanted to instill. But it did not end there. As the year went on, my students' strength of character was working in deep ways that I was not even aware of. I noticed one particular student beginning to struggle in school. Euro was a diligent student, but lately he had seemed reserved and withdrawn. I could hardly blame him. As one of the few Muslim students in our school, the year which had been filled with heated and discriminatory rhetoric from the media and pop culture had been difficult for him. I made it a point to check in with him often. I wanted him to know that he had someone who would listen to his concerns and act as an ally for him. One day, Euro opened up to me about the way some students had joked at him, had looked at him, that made him feel uncomfortable. I asked him if there were any students in our class who made him feel more secure. I never expected this response. He told me that all the students in our class, the one who had helped him the most was Aiden. Apparently, one day unsolicited, Aiden had walked over to him and in a candid way that only Aiden could say, "I want to tell you, I know you're not a terrorist." That really meant a lot to me. I judged Aiden when I first met him because he is different, but now I realize he is just a person, and I'm just a person. We are just people. That helps. I had focused my efforts on getting the other students to make Aiden feel part of our community, and in the end, this empathy and respect resulted in Aiden being uniquely capable of making Hero feel included. To me, that is the power of teaching our students to have strong values. In the best cases, the students themselves take the values over and demonstrate them in ways a teacher cannot dictate or even imagine. You can't measure or quantify this. It will not show up on a test result, but the evidence of strong character will be present in our community. After all, isn't that the purpose of education? Oof. Integrated character. We teachers cannot spend a few minutes a day talking to our students about respect or integrity and think it's going to make a meaningful impact on them. Character education should not be merely a scheduled event. Rather, character needs to be woven into every part of our school day. Good character needs to be part of our school culture and modeled in the way we treat our students and colleagues. This was a lesson learned from the Partnerships in Character Education state pilot projects. It was found that collectively, the states reported that implementation must include the entire school community and be integrated throughout the entire school curriculum and culture. Possibly the most vocal leader in integrating character education into public schools is David Levin, co-founder of KIPP Charter Schools. David's unlikely collaboration with psychology professor Martin Seligman, professor of Angela Duckworth, known for her work studying grit, and private school headmaster Dominic Randolph was profiled in a 2011 New York Times Magazine article. It described how the team worked to develop a comprehensive character education program that focused on a set of strengths that were, according to the research, especially likely to predict life satisfaction and high achievement. Levin emphasizes a strategy in his schools where teachers explicitly discuss character during lessons. For example, English classes discuss the character strengths and weaknesses of the protagonists in the novels that the class is reading. This helps students recognize their own strengths and weaknesses. This is a great example of how character education is not just another thing that teachers need to find a way to fit into our already busy day. It is something that should be woven purposefully throughout our day, a sentiment echoed by many. Timothy Rusnick, a former professor and principal of Ben Franklin High, one of the highest ranked schools in Louisiana, has stated that students' attention should be focused on the ethical dimensions of stories, the moral aspects of history, and applying the moral of a story to the student's own life. Bob Chase, a former president of the National Education Association, NEA, said, "We must make an explicit commitment to formal character education. We must integrate character education into the fabric of the curriculum and into extracurricular activities. We must train teachers in character education, both pre-service and in-service. And we must consciously set about creating a moral climate within our schools." Making the decision to integrate character education consciously is important. The act of learning itself requires a strong character. Curiosity, perseverance, and resiliency are all requirements to acknowledging or to acquiring knowledge. Take the time to be deliberate about character in each lesson, whether it is calling out specific character traits from a story or simply closing a lesson with a reflection on how well the school community's values were demonstrated. Teacher tools. Creating common values. Break for 1 minute here. Creating common values. In order to teach our students character, each school community will have to define what character means and what qualities the students in their school should strive to embody. This is the first step. Determining the values you want your students to embody might be more difficult than it seems. There are many dimensions to character. It all depends on which lens you want to look through. You could see character in terms of moral character versus performance character. Character.org has broken down aspects of character in this way. Fairness and generosity are both examples of the ethical values that make up moral character, while performance character focuses more on the individual and encompasses traits like effort and diligence. Another way to look at character is through relationships. The Institute of Education Sciences characterizes 3 types of values according to which form of relationship they fit into. First are intrapersonal values, those characterizing the individual's behavior and attitudes in a wide range of situations and activities, such as honesty, perseverance, and integrity. There are also interpersonal values, which are characterizing the individual's behavior and attitude towards others, like caring, respect, and empathy. Finally, there are civic virtues, which are characterizing the individual's behavior and attitudes toward the community and society, and include patriotism and justice. Even more important than selecting character traits to emphasize in a school community is the selection process itself. An analysis of the efficacy of the character education state pilot projects found that perhaps the most important lesson to emerge from the character education pilot project reports was that successful character education requires the participation of the entire community. This sentiment was echoed by education advocate Linda McKay. What I saw emerging in the research grants was that in order for character education to be effective, it really has to be a school-wide process based on faculty, students, and parents. I've realized that any character program that mandates a pre-selected list of values is missing a vital component. The values of a community reflect the entire community and should be determined by all stakeholders. Yes, this includes teachers and school leaders, but also students and families. When beginning or expanding a character education program in your classroom, it is wise to ask for input from the students and the broader community, something I'm working toward at my school. Find out what their ideal classroom community would look like, how your community wants to be treated when they are in school, what character traits students want to see in their classmates, and what vision everyone has for their future. Allowing the entire community to play an active role in determining the values of their school serves 2 purposes. First, It will create more buy-in from students because everyone is more eager to participate in something they've had a hand in creating. Second, and even more importantly, our students know more about what it is like to be a kid or adolescent in today's world than we teachers do. Our students are experts in the challenges they face, and they can be great sources in pinpointing exactly what character traits are needed to overcome those obstacles. Students and families have contributions and insights that should be valued when determining the core values of a school community. Schools should keep in mind that these values belong to everyone. As the community grows and changes, the values of a school might need to evolve along with it. I don't mean that a school will all of a sudden stop valuing respect, but perhaps there might be a renewed need to emphasize innovation or creativity. I can also see school culture shifting focus between values that pertain to individuals, such as personal effort, to values with a focus on the community, like collaboration. In this way, a school's values might be thought of like a mural, which can be carefully added to or amended over time instead of as words etched in stone. 2. Common language. Once the values of a school community have been clarified, a common language can be formed. Building this common language among teachers, students, and community members is the foundation of developing character. But it is often a neglected step. Most research on shared language comes from the business world and the healthcare industry, where ineffective communication can cost profits or even lives. Interestingly, this research suggests the efficacy of shared language depends entirely on empathy. As stated in the Australasian Medical Journal, looking at communication from the endpoint of the user helps us to develop empathy, which is a critical factor in building relationships and being able to communicate effectively with others. Yet another reason to incorporate character education in our schools. Our schools can learn important lessons by examining the way we talk about our values. As teachers, we help our students understand the concepts behind our values, like what it means to be responsible. But this clarifying work is also necessary for the adults, too. We all come with our own perceptions of values, which are heavily influenced by our backgrounds and the realities of our lives. The specific words a school uses matter. Think of the nuanced differences between honesty and truth. At my school, our community places a high value on kindness. You will hear that word repeated all over our school. I say, "Can you show kindness and help us clean up?" And during the morning announcements, our principal praises students who have been kind to others at recess. I frequently hear our students compliment each other for being a kind friend. When our students hear the word kind from so many sources and for so many occasions, it is powerful. In our school, a shared language around the value of kindness helps us celebrate exceptional character in our students. Students are able to see kindness in themselves and their peers, but they can also recognize its absence. When students make bad decisions, this shared language helps us have discussions with students that go far beyond getting in trouble. We can help students understand that a hurtful action is wrong, not just because it breaks a rule, but also because being unkind goes against their personal character. It is also helpful to discuss what your school values would look like in the different settings of your school. Our school does just that. We explicitly teach our students what our values look like in the hallway, on the playground, even in the bathroom. We hang posters that make it clear what our expectations are for their behavior. You can recruit your students to help make these. It's as simple as passing out a few pieces of paper and having groups of students write 3 ways to show gratitude in the lunch line, or how students can be responsible during study hall. Schools are made up of so many individuals, but a shared language helps build community. It acts as a bridge that ties the community together and gives us a common identity. 3, character rubrics. Teachers are familiar with rubrics to help students evaluate their academic content, but rubrics can also be powerful tools to help them develop strong character. In academia, rubrics have typically been used for the purpose of scoring. The creator of the rubric, usually the teacher, determines the criteria and the dimensions of the product to be assessed. Then each criterion is described for different levels of performance. Usually there are points connected to each level of performance, but there are some important distinctions between a scoring rubric and a supportive character rubric. There are several character rubrics being used in schools that are great resources. Many of these rubrics evaluate character for students based on the frequency a specific trait is demonstrated, like one from the Character Counts 6-pillar program that evaluates if a student respects authority. Always, almost always, usually, sometimes, or seldom. There is an implication that the difference between someone with strong character and someone with weak character is how often that individual exhibits a particular trait or behavior. This is a dangerous fallacy, as even a bank robber could almost always, for example, honor people's property. In addition, this form of rubric is not descriptive enough for students. It provides no information on what respects authority looks like. For me, the purpose of a character rubric is to give students a clear picture of what a value looks like in real life. It should give students a judgment-free continuum for a particular character trait or value. This allows them to see that traits like honesty and responsibility can grow with effort over time, and that character can change and grow too. It counteracts the detrimental idea that character traits are fixed. Another key distinction is that these rubrics are for our students, which means these measures should use language students understand, and that is meaningful to them. These rubrics could even be created by students. As teachers, we can certainly facilitate the creation of these rubrics to ensure they are accurate and supportive, but the most powerful rubrics will be student-directed. One last note, if the purpose of a character rubric is for students to be able to reflect on their own character and set goals, then qualifying or awarding students to a value might be counterproductive. There's a strong urge in education to make everything data-driven, but we need to ask ourselves if scoring a student's character strength is yielding the results we want. Personally, I want my students to self-reflect and think. I need to work on listening to others so I can understand their point of view, not I need more points on empathy. The difference between these two thoughts is certainly a result of the way a teacher frames conversation. But the second we attach numbers to character traits, we are creating a system driven by sums and averages, and that does not always meet our goal of developing strong character. Teaching our students good character means teaching them the skills they need right now as students, and also to be strong members of the society we will release them into. As adults, our students will need both academic skills and strong character to succeed. But what good is an education that produces students with perfect grades but little integrity? What impact can our students make on the world if they can analyze data and state facts, but do not possess the curiosity and perseverance to ask difficult questions and struggle to seek answers? What type of change would be made on a global scale if our schools gave equal focus to developing critical thinking skills and developing a deep sense of empathy? Educators need to remember this basic truth. Our students will grow to become our neighbors, our peers, and hopefully even my superiors. The impact our students have on us might and should be greater than the impact we have on our students. It is true It is also true that our students, once independent in the world, will carry with them the values they learn both in their homes and in their schools. With this in mind, I choose to intentionally teach character in my classroom. I can't afford not to. I truly believe I am educating the children who will become my bosses, my leaders, and my inspiration one day. That belief impacts the priorities of my teaching. I am not only preparing my students to take tests, but I am preparing my students to lead myself and my city. The goal of my teaching is both to develop problem-solving skills and the will to solve difficult problems. I expect greatness from my students and therefore also expect pride, tolerance, and resiliency. Many of my students have already learned aspects of a strong character from their families and communities. It is my goal to build upon what my students have already learned. My classroom acts as an incubator that grows and develops even further the values each student begins the school year with. Over the course of the year, I see my students become even more compassionate and more dedicated than when we first met. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, I need to teach my students academic skills, and I take that responsibility very seriously. But an equal priority for me is to teach them the values that will help form them into the people my community needs and deserves. To me, this is the purpose of schooling. Thank you for joining me today. Be well.